forgiving their debt. Hadley Heath says when students know they're going to be bailed out, well, they're just going to keep borrowing, and they have no incentive to pay back. And, well, you can guess who's going to end up paying for it. Ungar and Benkie also join us as well. So, Hadley, what do you mean by that? Help us out here.
Well, the sponsors of this legislation say it's about fairness. They couldn't be more wrong. This is a very unfair suggestion that would forgive some debts, keep the debts of others in place. It would punish students who'd made prudent decisions like going to a less expensive college, working through college, choosing a college major that's more marketable. Students who made smart decisions will be punished, while students who made bad decisions get the reward.
Didi, you agree with that?
Well, I think this might be one time I'm in the middle, because I really hate the fact that the Obama administration has wasted so much money and given so many bailouts. And then you get to the kids, you get to the students who actually, they may need a break. You know, because guess what? The economy's so bad, they're stuck in their parents' basement. They can't get a job. The economy's awful. So, no, they shouldn't know that, hey, I'm just going to spend or I'm just going to get the bailout, because they're not even through school yet.
Well, what about some of the points that Hadley brought up that are pretty interesting? If you take a major where there's like 25% unemployment and you knowingly take this major anyway, should the rest of the country pay for your education?
On. Okay, well, you know what, Charles? I was a history major, so I'm not going to go for that either. If you want to major in history, or if you want to major in something that you feel is important, like art, I don't think, you know, you're a business guy, so of course you're making the dough, you're raking it in, but, you know, let people major what they want. No, I mean, it's not like that. Just because we're talking about possibly giving some relief to students. If anyone needed the relief, it's students. However, students should know that they have to take responsibility, and maybe there should be a class about that, about taking responsibility with your loan.
And that should be in the first grade, by the way, not in college. Here's the thing, though, Rick. You remember the good old days. They had the city college. It was free. A lot of smart people graduated from there. But those days are long gone right now.
Well, yeah, but in the good old days, somebody like myself could go to school, work full-time, and get through. Today, you could work full-time. You're not going to have anywhere near enough money. Look, a couple of important things here. First and foremost, there's not a chance in the world this bill is going to pass. So let's keep that in mind. We all know that.
Well, hold on one second.
It's not. It's just
when Mitt Romney talked about the president giving away gifts, one of the ones he talked about most specifically was forgiveness of student loans. It feels like it's implied that ultimately this will happen.
Actually, ultimately it will. But let's talk about why. There is a critical public policy issue here that you cannot forget. We already know that the African-American community, the Latino community, is racking up more debt than anybody else. Why? Because they have less money to go to school. You take away loans to begin with, and all of a sudden you've got all rich kids going to school. But let me tell you something else that's important. Karen Bass, who's the congresswoman who sponsored this bill, nobody knows the area of higher education more than Karen Bass. As the head of the assembly out in California, she was a regent of the largest state university.
But what does that have to do with taxpayers paying student loans that they didn't rack up? What about the cab driver out there who didn't go to college, and now all of a sudden you're taking a piece of that person's taxes?
Well, it's complete bailout. Just perhaps maybe give them a break, give them a little more time, make it a little easier. Not that they're not. Yeah, exactly. Not that they don't pay it back. They should pay it back. But you know what? They're in a tough bind, and a lot tougher than some of these other yahoos, you know, on Capitol Hill, and also, you know, they can't pay for their homes, and they're the folks that shouldn't get the bailouts. I think students should give a little bit of break too, and also I think the administrations in the universities, I mean, they're just fat. I mean, and you know, and there's no reason for that tuition to keep going up.
Right.
In fact,
there's one reason. The states keep cutting the amount of money they're giving.
Well, there's another reason, Hadley, that it keeps going up. The fact is, if the government keeps doling out money, and by the way, colleges are one of these favorite classes that they'll never be critiqued by their friends in the liberal media. So college professors can earn money, they can have tenure, they can build these wonderful campuses, and their tuition can outpace inflation by 500%, and no one says anything because, again, it's the government that's footing the bill for this whole thing.
Absolutely. It's called subsidy capture. What happens, who's the beneficiaries of these student loans at subsidized rates or student loans forgiveness? It is the colleges and universities that are benefiting, not necessarily the young college graduates. If you want to help young college graduates, I beseech you, reform Social Security, reform Medicare, reform our entitlements. Give us a break on the public debt, because that's ultimately going to lay on the shoulders of my generation.
And, you know, and here's a good example, actually. Mitch Daniels, former governor of Indiana, he is actually freezing tuition. Thank you, Mitch Daniels. He's freezing tuition, which is a really good idea, because you know what? That helps the students. And then, you know, because he's a cutter, you know, he's the slasher. He's the guy that is very good with economics. So, you know what? He's making sure that the administration, the university, they're not the ones getting the break. It's the students.
Well, that's great. That's great. But again, here's the thing that I tell kids also. be careful about someone forgiving your loan right now, because 20 years from now, when this goes back around and they forgive the loans again, the pay tag is going to be significantly higher.
It's fair enough, but one thing we've got to clear up. For some reason, everybody wants to lay the blame for this rising tuition on these federal loans. Talk to anybody involved in the process of running these large schools, and they will tell you that is not it. Every year, they're getting less and less and less money from the states. They have nowhere else to go but to raise tuition.
What about schools like Harvard sitting on $24 billion? Are you kidding me?
Private institute, different situation.
Well, they're sitting on a whole lot of money.
And there's not a lot of loans going to kids at Harvard.
I got to tell you, some of these public schools where the highest paid employee in the state is the athletic director, followed by the football coach, followed by the basketball coach. I don't want to hear the idea that somehow their tuition's going through the roof and ultimately have to pay.
The relief, not that they don't pay it back, but perhaps they get a break, or tuition needs to be lower. That's the problem.
There should also be some clamping down on all the building going on.
Flooding the market with consumers who aren't paying with their own money.
Yeah, that's called Inflation 101. But we're going to have you guys back again later on in the show. Next, though, we're going to talk about the windfall.
How much you on for you? Only like $20. That's all. $20? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. You know, we just I know I'm going to board. Thank you.
Well, that Florida clerk arrested for paying $20 in cash for $40 in food stamps. A scam that's a lot more common than you think. Police locking up another clerk this week for buying food stamps on the cheap and using them to stock his shelves. Benkie says it's no mistake food stamp trafficking fraud has more than doubled under the Obama administration. She says the White House is making it easy for folks to get their hands on them. Hadley is back, as Rick is back as well, and maybe the old Dee is back on this segment as well.
Well, you know, how hard is it? I mean, this store got busted not once but twice. I mean, they were busted before, so don't you think maybe they would have, I don't know, set up some sort of system so they would have made sure it didn't happen again? And in 1 year, it's $100 million of fraud. I mean, obviously, this administration has a real problem with oversight. I mean, you've got GSA, you've got this, you've got everything across the board. So it really tremendous problem.
I mean, Rick, come on now. You know, you look at a chart of food stamps since 1980, and what's happened over the last few years. You can't blame the Great Recession. You can't blame anything else except the Obama administration really saying we want as many people as possible on food stamps.
You really want to blame the Obama administration because a crook in Florida is buying food stamps and stocking his shelves? No, that's a bit of a stretch.
When you put $75 billion into the economy without almost zero accountability, it does breed this kind of stuff.
Look, yeah. I'm not going to defend the behavior of these people down in Florida. It's outrageous. Criminals are criminals. But you know what kind of gets me? We're getting nuts about this food stamp program. We're getting nuts that there's some fraud going on, and there is. Why aren't we talking about what's taking place in the private sector, where companies like Walmart are purposely pushing their employees onto Medicaid, which is costing all of us a whole lot more than what food stamps are costing us as taxpayers? Well, why don't we get nuts about that?
Maybe Walmart's doing that because Obamacare's mandates are going to raise prices for employers who try to buy insurance that way.
Nothing to do with that.
Here's what's happening with the food stamp program. I am not going to demean people who are on food stamps because most of them are honest people. But when we have a national government that demands that they be in charge of every anti-poverty program, what we have instead is a case where 1% of all the dollars we spend on food stamps are actually being wasted in fraud cases. The best way to fight fraud in these anti-poverty programs is to make them more local instead of having one central government in Washington, D.C. administer all of these programs.
What do you think, Dee?
Well, you know, here's the thing, too. I mean, if they're selling the food stamps for 20 cents on the dollar, obviously they don't need the food that badly. So it's already too easy of a program because they're selling them to have cash to go buy something else. So that's not a good sign right there. You know, and people are able to stay on food stamps too long. It's too easy. You know, this supervision here and the oversight just isn't there in the administration.
Would you admit, Rick, to Dee's point that there is some slippery slope aspect to this? Listen, you know, the emails are going to get flooded later on when people watch this, but I always say I think one of the problems is in this country we're making poverty too comfortable to escape.
Well, yeah, I know you say that. You got in some trouble for saying that this past week.
Right,
and I will admit to Dee's point that there is some slippery slope, but I really appreciate what Hadley said, which is, let's keep in mind that the overwhelming majority of people on food stamps are honest and need them.
This is not an attack on poor people. In fact, what I'll say, Hadley, is that I think it's some sort of a shame that when you have a system when someone's born on food stamps and they die on food stamps, there's something wrong with that. I think that somehow America actually failed those people. We didn't help them. We failed them.
But most people do need
Absolutely.
them to get them.
The surge in the food stamp program actually happened around the time of the economic recession. A lot of people suffered major losses, and our hearts go out to people who are still struggling to get by. But as the economy continues to recover, we see stagnation. We see the same number of people on the food stamp program. It actually continues to grow. So that's a problem. You're right, Charles, to point out that this is a cyclical, a generational problem, and social mobility is what we need to focus on in this country.
Let's keep something very important in mind. Hadley's correct. The economy is recovering, but none of us are going to pretend that there's not a real problem with jobs. Just because the economy is recovering, corporations are doing better, you have a lot of people still, even who have jobs, because they're going back to lower paying jobs, that they still need this help. Let's not pretend that's not real.
But those people aren't the problem. We're not saying that's the problem.
But that's most people.
No. The problem is the system, that they're able to take advantage of the system. And why don't they have the picture on the card, or why don't they have better oversight?
I'm okay with that.
This happens over and over again. $100 million in 1 year worth of fraud, where that money could have gone to poor people who really need it. But instead, the criminals are getting a hold of it because there's no oversight in the administration. So it is the administration's fault.
It's really not. That's silly.
It really is.
Not the administration's fault. Unfortunately, the president might have a few more things to do.
Real quick, Rick, at what point, if unemployment goes to 7% and this program is still going up, wouldn't you acknowledge at least at that point there's a disconnect?
Yes, well, there's 2 points to that. I'm inclined to agree with what you just said, but let's keep in mind one of the big problems we have is people are getting jobs at lower pay.
Okay, guys, we're going to have to leave it there. Fantastic. I think we could have went a little longer, but tomorrow, Darth Vader, that's right, Darth Vader himself.